Deep inside Shennongjia, there are valleys where daylight disappears long before evening arrives. Endless walls of bamboo rise through drifting mountain fog while narrow pathways vanish beneath thick vegetation almost without warning. Travelers who entered these mountains decades ago described a sensation they struggled explaining afterward. Not immediate fear. Something more psychologically disturbing. The feeling that the deeper they walked into the forest, the less stable the world around them became. Local villagers passed warnings between generations advising outsiders never to wander too far once heavy mist rolled through the valleys because certain sections of the mountains were believed to confuse the mind. Some claimed travelers lost all sense of direction there despite following familiar trails. Others quietly spoke about strange lights moving through the bamboo after dark. From above, the mountain forests almost appear peaceful. But once the fog begins moving between the valleys, locals say the atmosphere changes completely. Over time, the black bamboo forest developed a reputation across China as a place where ordinary logic no longer felt entirely reliable. And what unsettled people most was not a creature hiding somewhere in the bamboo, but the growing fear that the mountains themselves might affect human perception in ways nobody fully understood. Long before internet videos transformed the black bamboo forest into a modern mystery, the isolated mountains surrounding Shennongjia already carried a reputation for danger throughout nearby villages. The geography alone was enough to unsettle travelers. Dense bamboo stretches across steep mountain terrain where weather conditions shift rapidly once fog settles between the valleys. Visibility narrows almost instantly. Familiar landmarks disappear. Entire pathways begin looking identical after only a few minutes of walking. Even experienced travelers admitted the environment could become deeply disorienting once heavy mist moved through the mountains. Yet local fears surrounding the forest went far beyond difficult terrain. Villagers repeatedly described the mountains as behaving differently after the fog arrived. Older residents warned children never to wander into isolated valleys during certain weather conditions because the forest changes. Some believed the mountains could overwhelm a traveler's sense of direction emotionally as well as physically. Others described sections of bamboo where people became strangely panicked despite no visible danger being present. Those warnings became more serious after stories spread involving travelers disappearing temporarily inside remote mountain regions during the 20th century. According to local accounts, several people entered isolated sections of forest and later returned unable to explain how they became lost so quickly. One recurring detail appeared repeatedly across unrelated stories. People described the environment itself becoming unfamiliar once the mist settled over the bamboo. Ordinary sounds disappeared. Trails no longer looked recognizable. Distances became difficult to judge. One man reportedly returned to a nearby village insisting he walked in a straight line for nearly an hour before somehow arriving back at the same clearing repeatedly. Another account described a group hearing movement through the bamboo beside them despite seeing nobody nearby. Then came the detail that disturbed locals most: silence. Travelers described entering sections of forest where insects stopped making noise completely. No birds. No wind. Only towering bamboo standing motionless in heavy fog. One traveler later recalled stopping beside a narrow trail after noticing something deeply unsettling. The bamboo surrounding him had begun swaying slowly back and forth, despite the air around him remaining completely still. That image spread quietly through nearby communities because it captured the emotional instability many people associated with the mountains. From a distance, the valleys appeared calm and beautiful. But once travelers entered the fog-covered bamboo, locals believed the forest stopped behaving like ordinary wilderness entirely. Over time, the black bamboo forest became more than an isolated mountain region. It became a place where many people believed reality itself could no longer be trusted completely. As stories connected to the black bamboo forest spread further across China, the mystery evolved beyond ordinary wilderness legends. What disturbed people most was not simply the disappearances or reports of travelers becoming lost. It was how similar the emotional experiences sounded between completely unrelated accounts. Again and again, people described entering isolated sections of bamboo forest and feeling as though the environment itself had become psychologically hostile. Some travelers reported overwhelming emotional pressure building inside the valleys without understanding why. Others described sudden panic appearing in areas where no visible threat existed. One recurring pattern involved people losing confidence in their own perception. Travelers explained that familiar terrain suddenly felt impossible to recognize despite remaining only short distances from marked trails. Several stories described individuals following what appeared to be straightforward paths before somehow returning repeatedly to the same locations without understanding how they changed direction. Local sayings warned outsiders never to trust distance inside the mountains once fog covered the valleys because certain sections of the forest were believed to distort human judgment. That belief survived because too many people described nearly identical experiences. During daylight, some parts of the bamboo valleys looked almost peaceful beneath drifting mountain light. But locals claimed the atmosphere changed quickly once visibility collapsed. Then came reports involving unusual lights. Some villagers claimed faint glowing objects occasionally moved silently through distant bamboo sections late at night during periods of heavy fog. Others believed strange atmospheric reflections appeared naturally inside the mountains under specific conditions. Yet no explanation fully erased the stories because witnesses described the experiences with unsettling emotional certainty. One traveler later recounted hearing footsteps moving beside him through dense bamboo for several minutes despite nobody else entering the mountains that day. Another described watching a dark shape move briefly between the trees before the surrounding forest became unnaturally silent. But perhaps the most psychologically disturbing accounts involved people describing the forest as feeling aware. Not haunted in the traditional sense. Something more difficult to define. Travelers repeatedly explained the sensation as though the environment itself reacted to their presence once they entered certain isolated areas. Some later refused returning to the mountains entirely despite spending years hiking remote wilderness regions elsewhere in China. Others admitted they still could not explain why the forest affected them so strongly emotionally. Attempts were made to explain the stories through weather conditions, isolation, visual distortion caused by dense bamboo patterns, and psychological stress triggered by unfamiliar terrain. Those theories may describe part of what happened there. But they never fully dissolved the fear surrounding the forest because the emotional experiences remained deeply convincing to the people who lived through them. And somewhere between scientific explanation and local belief, the black bamboo forest transformed into something far more unsettling than an ordinary regional mystery. What separates the black bamboo forest from ordinary ghost stories is that many local beliefs surrounding the mountains were never centered around monsters or supernatural creatures alone. The deeper fear involved the idea that certain places inside the forest should not be entered casually because something there interferes with human perception itself. Older villagers living near isolated mountain regions passed warnings between generations advising travelers to avoid specific valleys once thick fog settled over the trails. Some believed hidden sections of forest existed where people could lose all sense of direction despite remaining physically close to civilization. Others quietly spoke about locations where visitors experienced overwhelming dread for reasons nobody could explain clearly afterward. Those beliefs survived because the environment naturally reinforces emotional instability. Endless vertical bamboo patterns stretch across the mountains while shifting fog continuously changes the appearance of the landscape. Distances become unreliable. Sound behaves unpredictably. Visibility narrows without warning. Entire sections of forest begin feeling disconnected from ordinary reality. Local stories evolved around that emotional uncertainty for generations. Some villagers believed isolated valleys hidden deeper within the mountains could trap travelers psychologically, causing them to wander in circles without realizing it. Others claimed there were regions where people experienced such intense confusion that they abandoned familiar routes entirely. One recurring story involved travelers hearing distant voices calling through the bamboo despite nobody being present nearby. Another described hunters refusing to enter certain valleys after sunset because the mountains do not want strangers there after dark. What kept these stories alive was the fact that large sections of the surrounding terrain remained historically difficult to fully explore completely. Isolation protected the mystery. Unlike heavily developed tourist destinations, the mountains surrounding Shennongjia continued feeling emotionally unknown even as modern civilization expanded elsewhere. At sunrise, the bamboo valleys can appear breathtakingly beautiful beneath rolling clouds and pale mountain light. Yet locals insist the atmosphere becomes entirely different once thick fog settles over the forest floor. That uncertainty allowed local beliefs to survive naturally. People continued wondering whether hidden valleys still existed beyond the visible trails. Whether unexplored cave systems remained buried beneath the mountains. Whether travelers occasionally crossed into places where ordinary perception stopped behaving reliably. And perhaps that is why the mystery surrounding the black bamboo forest never disappeared completely. Because the bamboo still moves beneath drifting fog. The mountains remain isolated. Local warnings continue surviving across generations. And somewhere deep inside the valleys of Shennongjia, many people still believe something there has never been fully understood. The black bamboo forest represents something much deeper than a regional mystery hidden inside China's mountains. It reflects a fear modern civilization rarely confronts anymore, the fear of entering a place where certainty itself begins collapsing. Most people live surrounded by structure, technology, maps, and constant connection to the outside world. But isolated forests, hidden valleys, and unexplored mountains remind humanity that parts of the earth still exist beyond ordinary psychological control. That realization becomes especially powerful in places connected to repeated stories involving disappearances, emotional disorientation, and unexplained experiences. Because once enough people describe similar feelings tied to the same environment, the mystery becomes difficult to dismiss entirely. The black bamboo forest survived for generations because it exists perfectly between reality and uncertainty. The geography is real. The bamboo is real. The fog is real. The emotional reactions experienced by travelers are also real. Yet somewhere inside that reality remains a question nobody fully answers: why do so many people leave describing the same sensation that the forest itself feels emotionally wrong? That unanswered question keeps the mystery alive. Not because anyone proved supernatural forces exist inside the mountains, but because the environment continues producing experiences capable of unsettling human perception in ways people struggle explaining afterward. And perhaps that is why humans remain obsessed with places like this throughout history. Deep forests, isolated oceans, forbidden caves, and hidden valleys preserve the possibility that the world may still contain regions humanity does not completely understand. The black bamboo forest becomes emotionally unforgettable because it protects that possibility. Somewhere beyond the visible trails and drifting fog, the audience begins imagining unexplored spaces still untouched by ordinary life. Hidden valleys where sound disappears strangely. Places where travelers no longer trust their own direction. Regions where the bamboo moves without wind while the forest falls completely silent. From above, the mountains still appear calm beneath rolling clouds. But inside the bamboo valleys, many travelers describe the disturbing sensation that the landscape itself is watching them. That is the image people carry away from this mystery. Not proof. Not answers. Only the unsettling possibility that somewhere inside the mountains of Shennongjia, reality itself still behaves differently enough to make even experienced travelers question what they encountered there. Some mysteries survive because evidence was never discovered. Others survive because the place itself continues affecting people in ways nobody fully explains afterward. The black bamboo forest remains disturbing not because anyone proved something supernatural exists inside it, but because too many travelers entered the mountains and returned describing remarkably similar experiences. Disorientation. Emotional instability. Silence so complete it no longer felt natural. And the terrifying sensation that the deeper they entered the bamboo valleys, the less the forest wanted them to leave. Maybe the stories are only legends shaped by isolation, fog, and human fear. Or maybe certain places on Earth still affect the human mind in ways modern civilization cannot fully understand yet. And somewhere beyond the visible trails of Shennongjia, where bamboo still moves beneath silent fog, some locals believe there are valleys people enter once, but never experience the same way again.